So I got to look at the opening slide for our next speaker's presentation, and it's already a winner. I'm a Penn State fan, not an alum, but when anybody can start their presentation with Saquon Barkley on the front of it, I figure it's got to be good. So we want to welcome Lauren Bechtel. Lauren is a program director at Penn State University's Center for Supply Chain Research. A large part of her job is working to bridge the research work that's being done back into the university and working with the professors, as well as leading some of those research and education initiatives for the organization. So without further ado, Lauren, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll get this turned on, and
Great.
There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Who's that?
Good afternoon. When I first graduated, my first job was working at Ernst & Young, and I was a management consultant, part of the strategic sourcing team. And I remember my first engagement. It was working for a successful global entertainment company. And I was part of a team that was implementing a strategic sourcing initiative. And being the lowest man on the totem pole, my glamorous accommodations were 2 boxes turned upside down in a basement by the servers, because I'd be extracting the data from all of the systems. They had many different purchasing systems across many different sites, and none of them were integrated. And when I first started pulling the data, I thought something was wrong, because prior to this, I was in training, and you learn how to code and you learn how to pull the data and you know what the data looks like, and everything rolled up really nicely. And I'm pulling this data and I couldn't believe it looked so bad. And I thought to myself, how can a company who's doing so well, right, dominates in its field, knows what the customer wants, when it wants it, where it wants it, before the customer even wants it, does so well, right, and be so bad, on the other hand, in something else. And yet 18 years later, even though not to that extreme, we still have the same kind of complexities. So today I'm going to go over a study that I worked on with Steve Tracy, who's the executive director for the Center for Supply Chain Research. Kusumal, I gotta get her name right, Rumsuk, I just call her Kusumal. But she's the research associate at the center, and Carol Kogan, who is the owner of North Bay, a consulting company that works with clients to improve purchasing initiatives. So today, I always mess this up. So today, I'm going to go over our MRO study, just real quick, the respondent profile, the study findings, key takeaway, conclusions, and answer any questions that you may have. Okay. So when we first started this study, we were really interested in getting a better understanding about what MRO strategies were implemented across all of the different activities in the MRO value chain. So we did a lot of research, and we came across 45 different activities that we thought were best practices. And you can see behind all of these, we then put them into 7 pillars. But you could see behind all of these, because I didn't want you to read them. So these are the 7 pillars, but you'll be able to see them later. And we really wanted to know what the management approaches were behind that. So what we did was, through executive interviews and surveys, let me see, okay. We asked organizations, what are your management approaches? Do you do centralized, or is it decentralized structure? Do you bring it in-house, or do you outsource to a third party? Okay. Another thing that we wanted to do was classify the respondents. One of the things we wanted to do was categorize them into leaders, evolving, and trailers. So we had the respondents evaluate themselves under 4 characteristics. So what we did was we asked this 4 questions. And based on their responses, we we put them in a category. We asked them if they had reliable strategies for operations, if do they make decisions with ROI in mind? Do they make decisions with payback period in mind? And do they use KPIs in evaluating their suppliers? So with that in mind, of course, the more positive the answer, the higher the score, the more they went up the maturity code, the maturity classification system. So what that meant was, so the result was, so 75%, because evolving and leaders, were going further down the MRO integration, where trailers, yes, trailers, they're kind of staying stagnant, but that gave us like an idea about where we're at, what kind of respondents we had, and we were able to do a comparison. Okay, so before I go into the findings, just a little bit about the survey. 40% of the survey respondents were from the manufacturing industry. The next biggest group was transportation, distribution, and warehousing at 16%, followed by wholesale at 9% and retail at 8%. And then there were 10 other industries that made up the next 26%. Let's see here. Okay. By revenue, we had a good amount of small firms, and we classified them that if you were less than 50 million revenue, you were a small firm. But the biggest group was the large firms, which was bigger than the revenue was larger than $1 billion. So we had a great amount of data. We had 171 respondents, so the data set was diverse. And the industry size and variety really added flavor to the survey. Okay. So again, these are the pillars, right? And so what we did was, now that we had the MRO maturity classification in place, and we surveyed those 45 activities that we identified as best practices, we wanted to do an analysis to analyze if the best practice, those activities, the MRO, the management approach that was used, and the maturity group all had a relationship. And what we found was 15 out of the 45 activities statistically significant. I practiced that in the car because I always tongue twister. So it was 15 out of 45 activities was statistically significant that there was indeed a relationship between the management approach, the maturity group, with the activity. So that looked better on my computer, I'm sorry. Can everybody see that? So highlighted in red are the activities that had a clear relationship between the maturity group and the management approach. So there's integrated master data management, business intelligence, performance tracking, spend analysis. So then narrowing it down to the 15, basically the centralized in-house pretty much dominated all three groups, right? So, but when you look closer in the data, right, 50% of the trailers, 50% of the evolving all had that kind of management approach. But the leaders were really dominant in that approach with an 85%, which gave them a 35% lead. Also, although it was rare, there's still 14 out of the 15 activities, they still had outsourcing in the evolving and leaders category. And last, demand forecasting. Leaders was the only group that had demand forecasting that had respondents outsourcing that. And we feel that mostly because of the specialized skill and technology needed for that. Okay. So we also asked in the survey, how is MRO handled within your company? And so the responses were, everything's handled internally, everything's handled, or everything's outsourced, or everything's managed in-house, or we handle it both in-house and we outsource it. And we had pretty much an even amount of 50-50, well 48-45, managed in-house and outsourced, and managed all in-house. So what we did was we wanted to know why, right? So we also followed up and asked the respondents, and what I captured here were the three reasons why, or the reasons that we weighted the reasons why they managed MRO internally. And the number one reason was specialized knowledge and competent personnel. The second one was faster internal response to downtime. And the third one was MRO inventory known and well managed. Reasons for outsourcing MRO: access to special knowledge and trained personnel, consolidation of vendor interactions, and invoice simplification and aggregation. And what was interesting in this was that both for insourcing and outsourcing, the answer was the same. It was they either kept it in-house or they outsourced it because they wanted access to specialized knowledge and trained personnel, which led us to this. If you have access within your organization, you have access to your specialized and trained personnel, right? You're ahead of the curve. If you don't, you have two options. You can either develop it if you have the time and the money, or another option would be to outsource it. So this slide, basically we broke it down. Where do we want, so if we wanted to give you the biggest bang for your buck, right? What should you focus on to get to the leaders category? So what we identified were two categories. So for the centralized in-house approach, what we did was we identified 3 activities that the leaders are furthest ahead. So for example, let me see here. So master data management, leaders are at, I think it was like 83%. However, evolving and trailers were around the 50s. Total cost of ownership evaluation, 70%, I can't even see that very well, 50 and 40. So that was one group that we identified. And then the other group that we identified were the trailers. Where were they furthest behind in the known management approach? And basically, it came down to these three activities: total cost of ownership. You know, this never fails. It's always me. Did I do? Yeah. What? Okay. Oh, great. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. So where are the, thank you, where are the trailers furthest behind? And through the analysis, what we had was that these 3 activities, trailers were furthest behind. So TCO evaluation, I'm going to hit the right button here. The trailers had 35% had no management approach indicated versus 5% in the leaders category. So the 2 categories were in the leaders furthest ahead, right? These are the 3 categories, and where the trailers are furthest behind in the management approaches. Any questions?
When you say network optimization, are you talking about the process to execute?
Yes, sir.
laggards and their inability or to do that TCO analysis versus maybe the maturity of their sourcing procurement organization?
We didn't have that data, but that would be a part two. But in terms of so what you're saying is there a procurement department capable of doing the total cost of our? We didn't collect that data to be able to do that. No. Okay.
Is there anything in the data that came out, that was really strong for a particular industry, like manufacturing versus wholesale versus all others?
No.
Pretty even across.
It was pretty even across. Mm-hmm. The biggest, not the biggest, but I would say it was really interesting when we asked, what's your reason for managing MRO internally, and what's your reason for managing MRO or outsourcing it? And the answer was the same, because it always comes down to people, right? You can have the best of everything, but it comes down to people, and that was really what we found was a key takeaway.
One more quick question. When I look at this graph, I look at the trailers, and this is I think what I'm interpreting here is this is their worst or weakest spots. Things are furthest behind them, correct?
Correct, sir.
I think it should be the norm. Yet KPI wasn't on there. I would think that the trailers were very weak in measuring themselves.
These were just the bottom three.
I'm just surprised that it didn't make the bottom. Because you're not measuring yourself normally, that's what you've got.
I see what you're saying.
The rest of it,
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
What I thought was interesting too is when I first looked at it, I'm looking, wait a second, these numbers are so high. But then I looked at the scale, so the scale sort of skews you because you're looking at it from 100% versus like 50%. So that's what it would be more impactful if the scale was the same.
You know what? You're right. You're right. That's a good point. Thank you. The article's already written, though.
Can I get a credit?
This was an article that we did last year for the supply chain management review. I did bring, I should have had this out, I'm sorry. I did bring, I have an extra copy or two, but this has a roadmap basically of what I was talking about today, where it identifies if you're not in the leaders category, what's the best way to get there. Okay, let me just put this. Okay.
Did it surprise you that master data management was number one for the leaders being furthest ahead? I mean, just kind of going into your story where you started out in your career, that master data management was one of those things, and you project forward X amount of years. Is that still kind of one of the key criteria for being ahead?
Because of the leaders?
Yeah.
I think that's actually been a huge improvement over the years, is master data, because with SAP, at the time, there were all of these different systems, and everything was decentralized, and everything was being operated in silos. And even though there's a lot of complexities that still that aren't fixed, I think master data management, even though we're still not there, it is one of the things that the leaders have a better grasp on.
It has equalized out over the years. There's still kind of a big gap between the leaders and all else. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every time Missy starts a conversation, it always comes down to data all the time. It really looks like it does come down to data all the time.
Yeah. Centralized.
Excuse me. I'm just wondering, was inventory optimization one of the?
Yes. Let me show you. Right here. I should have done a different color. I'm sorry. I didn't think about right here. And I have cards. If I can always give a copy of this so that you can see. Sure. So real quick, it's integrated master data management, business intelligence, performance tracking and reporting, spend analysis, leverage sourcing, critical item, TCO evaluation, supplier evaluation and management, demand forecasting, process mapping, integrated demand planning, network optimization, inventory optimization, replenishment strategies, and cycle counting. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's go here. Okay. So concluding thoughts. How to get to the leaders category. So obviously focusing on, these activities, right? But first you need to understand where you're at, right? So you have to do an assessment of where you're at within your company. And you also need to evaluate your talent, right? Because if you don't have that talent in-house, you have an option, either you build it or you're going to outsource it. But once you have those two things, you know where you are, you know what you have, you know where you want to go, you then can put your game plan together. So what I said, if your MRO management approach with a football game, how's it going for you? So like MRO, what's the score? So where are you at? Are you behind or are you ahead? What do you do to win? And what is the competency level of your players? Which circles back to what's your game plan to get there? Yes.
Any other questions? We'll have Lauren.
Lauren,
Yes, sir.
you said something in previous responses about the next stage or phase 2 or something like that. Is the center looking at doing additional research?
If there's funding, absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
How long did it take you to put this together?
This-
Research one?
That's a good. What the hard part is prior to this, there's a whole bunch of paperwork that you have to, because of the human, because any humans that are involved, there's this big legal stuff that you have to do beforehand. Even though you're only asking questions, that takes the longest amount of time. But the surveys and that sort of thing, we had that open 2 weeks, and within 2 days, really, that's when we got the 171 responses, and then it just trickled off. So I would say, I know exactly, 3 to 4 months.
So there's a hunger for this kind of information out there, getting that kind of response on the inquiries.
Yes, yes.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Lauren.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here and,
Thank you.
and sharing the information that you learned as part of the research that you've done. And here's a little token of our
Thank you.
appreciation for you being here. Take that from me.
And I'll leave my cards if you guys have any questions or would want any of the charts, please let me know.